Hello, Cubs, and today we're going to continue our reading of the Phantom Tollbooth. And we're going to start with me reminding us of yesterday's question. I asked you about this quote. I asked you what you thought Norton Juster meant by this quote. Now and then, though, someone does begin to grow differently. Instead of growing down, excuse me, his feet grow upward towards the sky, but we do our best to discourage awkward things like that. What happens to them? And here's the quote. Oddly enough, they grow 10 times the size of everyone else, said Alec thoughtfully, and I've heard that they walk among the stars. So that is what I asked you about, and here's what you guys said you thought that he meant, and then I'm going to share with you what I thought he meant. So, Mason says he thought that he meant that it's okay that happens. Nishvita said it's because all people are different, right? Because they're talking about differences. And Srivatsa said the same thing. Sarvanj said the same thing. Diley says not because people are different, it doesn't mean that they can't meet or be friends. And then Tanish said, I think he's trying to teach us that people are different, but that doesn't mean that they can't be friends or talk. So we had some agreement there. Miss Candleberry thinks it's saying, here he's talking about, so I'll tell you why I think this. Here he's talking about, how they discourage people from being too different, from growing in a different way. But here he's saying that when they do think different, when they do grow differently, they get to be even taller, they grow even more, and they get to do like really cool things like walk among the stars. So the thing that I think Norton Juster is saying is he's saying that, it's okay to think different and to be different, because when you think different, or maybe you are different, when you think differently or you are different, you can be even more extraordinary than you might have normally been. So that's what I think he's saying. Like, differences are okay. They're what make you extraordinary. All right. So here we go. We're going to start chapter 10. We're not going to finish chapter 10 because it's like over 20. It's very long. It's like almost 20 pages long. But we are going to have to, because we have several, chapters left. Oh, sorry, guys. That's my alarm. Since we have several chapters left, and we can see how many chapters we have if we go here. We are here at 10, and we need to get to 20. We don't have a lot of time left. So this is a really long chapter. The next chapter is a really long chapter, but after that, they get to be shorter. So this chapter might be one that we split up, but then after today and maybe tomorrow's, well, not tomorrow's chapter, but the chapter that we start after that, I might read that whole chapter even though it's longer. All right, here we go. A colorful symphony. As they ran, tall trees closed in all around them and arched gracefully towards the sky. The late afternoon sunlight leaped lightly from leaf to leaf, slid along the branches and down trunks, and dropped finally to the ground in warm, luminous patches. There's some more of that that descriptions. Have you noticed that he loves to start the chapter with Norton Juster? So let's read that again, and I really want you to picture this in your mind, okay? So make a movie in your mind. As they ran, tall trees closed in all around them and arched gracefully towards the sky. The late afternoon sunlight leaped lightly from leaf to leaf, slid along branches and down trunks, and dropped finally to the ground in warm, luminous patches. The soft glow filled the air with the kind of light that made everything look sharp and clear and close enough to reach out and touch. Alec raced ahead, laughing and shouting, but soon encountered some serious difficulties. For while he could always see the tree behind the next one, he could never see the next one itself and was continually crashing into it. After several minutes of wild dashing about, they stopped for a breath of air. I think we're lost, panted the humbug, collapsing into a large berry bush. Nonsense, shouted Alec from a high branch on which he sat. Do you know where we are? Asked Milo. Certainly, he replied. We're right here on this very spot. Besides, being lost is never a matter of not knowing where you are. It's a matter of not knowing where you aren't. And I don't care at all to know where I am not. This was much too complicated for the bug to figure out, and Milo had just begun repeating it to himself when Alec said, If you don't believe me, ask the giant. He pointed to a small house tucked neatly between two of the largest trees. So right here over this it says the giant. Milo and Tock walked up to the door, whose brass nameplate simply read, The Giant, and knocked. Good afternoon, said a perfectly ordinary-sized man who answered the door. Are you the giant? Asked Tock doubtfully. To be sure, he replied proudly. I'm the smallest giant in the world. What can I do for you? Are we lost? Said Milo. That's a very difficult question, said the giant. Why don't you go around back and ask the midget? Now, that's not a very nice word that we use now, but that means just like a little person. He closed the door. They walked to the rear of the house, which looked exactly the same as the front, and knocked on the door whose nameplate read the midget. How are you? Inquired the man, who looked exactly like the giant. Are you the midget? Asked Tock again, with a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Unquestionably, he answered. I'm the tallest midget in the world. May I help you? Do you think we're lost? Repeated Milo. Well, that's a very complicated problem, he said. Why don't you go around to the side and ask the fat man? And he, too, quickly disappeared. The side of the house looked very like the front and the back, and the door flew open the very instant they knocked. How nice of you to come by, exclaimed the man, who could have been the midget's twin brother. You must be the fat man, said Tock, learning not to count too much on appearance. The thinnest one in the world, he replied brightly. But if you have any questions, I suggest you try the thin man on the other side of the house. Just as they suspected, the other side of the house looked the same as the front, the back, and the side. And the door was again answered by a man who looked precisely like the other three. What a pleasant surprise, he cried happily. I haven't had a visitor in as long as I can remember. How long is that? Asked Milo. Well, I'm sure I don't know, he replied. Now, pardon me, I have to answer the door. But you just did, said Tock. Oh, yes, I've forgotten. Are you the fattest thin man in the world? Asked Tock. Do you know one that's fatter? He replied. Do you know one that's fatter? He replied impatiently. I think you're all the same man, said Milo emphatically. Well, I gotta read that differently. I think you're all the same man, said Milo emphatically. Shh, he cautioned, putting his finger up to his lips and drawing Milo closer. Do you want to ruin everything? You see, to tall men, I'm a midget. And to short men, I'm a giant. To skinny ones, I'm a fat man. And to fat ones, I'm a thin man. In that way, I can hold 4 jobs at once. So you see, though I'm neither tall nor short, nor fat nor thin, in fact, I'm quite ordinary. But there are so many ordinary men that no one asks their opinion about anything. Now, what's your question? Are we lost? Said Milo once again. Said the man, scratching his head. I haven't had such a difficult question in as long as I can remember. Would you mind repeating it? It slipped my mind. Milo asked the question for the 5th time. My, the man mumbled. I know one thing for certain. It's much harder to tell whether you are lost than whether you were lost. For on many occasions where you're going is exactly where you are. On the other hand, you often find that where you've been is not at all where you should have gone. And since it's much more difficult to find your way back from someplace you've never left, I suggest you go there immediately and decide. If you have any more questions, please ask the giant. He slammed his door and pulled down the shade. I want you to pause. Did that make sense to you? I'm going to reread it in my normal voice one time. My, the man. I know one thing for certain. It's much harder to tell whether you are lost, that means whether you're lost right now, or whether you were lost, which means you were lost in the past. For on many occasions, where you're going is exactly where you are. Well, that's true. Where you are, where you're going is most of the time where you go is where you are. Yeah. On the other hand, you often find that where you've been is not at all where you should have gone. So sometimes you go places you shouldn't be. And since it's much more difficult to find your way back from someplace you've never left, meaning if you're still there, you're not lost, right? That's what they're saying. I suggest you go there immediately. So he's saying go to that place where you are, and then decide if you're lost. So really, did he answer Milo's question? No. I hope you're satisfied, said Alec when they'd returned from the house, and he bounced to his feet, bent down to awaken the snoring Humbug, and started off more slowly this time in the direction of a large clearing. Do many people live here in the forest? Asked Milo, as they trotted along together. Oh, yes, they live in a wonderful city called Reality. So listen to this. There's a city called Reality, he announced, smashing into one of the smaller trees and sending a cascade of nuts and leaves to the ground. It's right this way. In a few more steps, the forest opened before them, and off to the left, a magnificent metropolis appeared. The rooftops shone like mirrors. The walls glistened with thousands of precious stones, and the broad avenues were paved in silver. Is that it? Shouted Milo, running towards the shining streets. No, oh no, that's only illusions, said Milo. The real city is over there. What are illusions? Milo asked, for it was the loveliest city he'd ever seen. Illusions, explained Alec, are like mirages. And realizing that this didn't help much, he continued. And mirages are things that aren't really there, but you can see very clearly. How can you see something that isn't there yet? Yawned the Humbug, who wasn't fully awake yet. Sometimes it's much simpler than seeing things as they are, he said. For instance, if something is there, you can only see it with your eyes open, but if it isn't there, you can see it just as well with your eyes closed. That's why imaginary things are often easier to see than real ones. Then where is reality? Barked Tock. Right here, cried Alec, waving his arms. You're standing in the middle of Main Street. They looked around carefully. Tock sniffed suspiciously at the wind, and the Humbug gingerly stabbed his cane at the air, but there was nothing at all to see. It's really a very pleasant city, said Alec, as he strolled down the street, pointing out several of the sights which didn't seem to be there, and tipping his cap to the passers-by. There were great crowds of people rushing along with their heads down, and they all appeared to know exactly where they were going as they darted down and around non-existent streets and in and out of missing buildings. I don't see any city, said Milo very softly. Neither do they, Alec remarked sadly. But it hardly matters, for they don't miss it at all. Now I want you to think about this. It must be, as we're going to learn, there's going to be something to think about soon. It must be very difficult to live in a city you can't see, Milo insisted, jumping aside as a line of cars and trucks went by. Not at all once you get used to it, said Alec. But let me tell you how it happened. And as they strolled along the bustling and busy avenue, he began. Many years ago, on this very spot, there was a beautiful city of fine houses and inviting spaces, and no one who lived here was ever in a hurry. The streets were full of wonderful things to see, and the people would often stop and look at them. Didn't they have any place to go? Asked Milo. To be sure, continued Alex. But as you know, The most important reason for going from one place to another is to see what's in between. And they took great pleasure in doing just that. Then one day, someone discovered that if you walked as fast as possible and looked at nothing but your shoes, you would arrive at your destination much more quickly. And soon, everyone was doing it. They all rushed down the avenues and hurried along the boulevards, seeing nothing of the wonders and beauties of their city as they went. Milo remembered the many times he'd done that very same thing, and, as hard as he tried, there were even things on his own street that he couldn't remember. No one paid any attention to how things looked, and as they moved faster and faster, everything grew uglier and dirtier. And as it grew uglier and dirtier, they moved faster and faster. And at last, a very strange thing began to happen. Because nobody cared, the city slowly began to disappear. Day by day, buildings grew fainter and fainter, and the cities faded away until the streets faded away, until the last it was entirely invisible. There was nothing to see at all. "What did they do?" the humbugger inquired, suddenly taking an interest in things. "Nothing at all," continued Alec. "They went right on living here just as they'd always done. In the houses they could no longer see, and on the streets which had vanished, because nobody had noticed a thing. And that's the way they have lived to this very day." "Hasn't anyone told them?" asked Milo. "It doesn't seem to do any good. It doesn't do any good," Alec replied, "for they can never see what they're in too much of a hurry to look for." Well, you think about that. They can never see what they're in too much of a hurry to look for. "Why don't they live in illusions?" suggested the humbug. "It's much prettier." "Many of them do," he answered, walking in the direction of the forest again. "But it's just as bad to live in a place where you do see what you do see isn't there, as it is to live in one where what you don't see is. Perhaps someday you can have one city as easy to see as illusions and as hard to forget as reality," Milo remarked. "That will only happen when you bring back rhyme and reason," said Alec, smiling, for he had seen right through Milo's plans. "Now let's hurry or we'll miss the evening concert." They followed him quickly up a flight of steps which couldn't be seen and through a door which didn't exist. And in a moment they had left reality, which was sometimes a hard thing to tell, so they left reality. And they stood in a completely different part of the forest. The sun was dropping slowly from sight, and the stripes of purple and orange and crimson and gold piled themselves on top of the distant hills. The last shafts of light waiting patiently for the flight of wrens, that's a kind of bird. So the last shafts of light waiting patiently for a flight of wrens to find their way home, and a group of anxious stars had already taken their place. "Here we are!" cried Alec with a sweep of his arm as he pointed to an enormous symphony orchestra. "Isn't it a grand sight?" And that's where we're going to stop, where we got to the orchestra, because the name of the title of the chapter is A Colorful Symphony. And an orchestra, in case you don't know, is a huge band that plays where there's lots of different instruments. Now, I said I wanted you to think of something, and the thing I want you to think of is the lesson. This is like a little folk tale, kind of fable, and it's not with animals, but that Alec is telling Milo. And the thing I want you to really focus on is this. Where is it? What do they do? I gotta find it. "It doesn't do any good," Alec replied, "for they can never see what they're in too much of a hurry to look for." So what lesson can you learn from that? That's probably the key part of the lesson. But what lesson do you learn from the people of the city of reality? Remember, reality, and when we talk about reality in real life, we're not talking about a city. We're talking about like what really exists, right? And we also learned about illusions, which is like what we kind of think is there, but it's not there. Um, right? So, look what you imagine to be there. So, I want you to think about that. What is it saying about reality? What is Norton Juster kind of want you to learn from the tale of the people who live in reality, and then sometimes who work and live in reality, and what is he saying that? What do you think he wants you to learn from their tale? That's what I want you to tell me. Sorry, Miss Canterbury. Somebody texted Miss Canterbury. Got distracted. So again, what do you want to learn? What does Norton Juster want you to learn from the story about the people who live in reality? All right. Let me know in the comment section on Class Dojo, and have an excellent Wednesday.